So as I said, today the church sets aside a day for us to celebrate the saints. Saints in our world and in our lives, those saints with a big S and saints with a small s. Reading their stories, the lives of the saints, learning about them, reminds me that the opposite of a saint is not a sinner. Because every human, and therefore every saint there ever was, except for Jesus, has sinned. Saints are sinners too. Certainly true of St. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. Before he turned his life around, he lived a life of gambling, dancing, and romancing young ladies. He was even arrested during the Carnival of 1515 for what is listed as premeditated and enormous crimes. A little closer to home, in the 1920s, if you had to pick a woman who was the least likely candidate for sainthood, probably would have been an anarchist and communist named Dorothy Day from Brooklyn. She worked as a journalist and spent many drunken nights downtown with famous writers like Hart Crane and Eugene O'Neill. She had an abortion and a brief marriage before finally being drawn to the gospel and converting. Her conversion to Catholicism led her to embark on a radical ministry to the poor, one that still changes the world today. And she's now a candidate for sainthood in our church. In fact, some of our students among you are working, helping her cause by transcribing her personal diaries. It's in Jesus and in his and our friends, the communion of saints, that we find models of holiness, of what is possible for our human lives in the context of God's unconditional love. And so when the second reading proclaims, "Beloved, see what the Father has bestowed on us, that we may be called children of God," St. John is calling us to recognize our universal call to holiness. We're all called to be holy. So if that's true, then the question is, how? How are we to be holy? How do we become saints? This is a question that a friend of Dorothy Day's, Thomas Merton, struggled with for a good part of his life. This is also close to home. He studied at Columbia and lived on the Upper West Side. A famous American Trappist monk and mystic, he writes in his autobiography of a conversation he had with his friend Bob while he was a graduate student at Columbia. Bob asks Merton, "What do you want to be?" Merton replies, "I don't know. I guess I want to be a good Catholic." It's a decent answer. Bob responds, "What you should say is you want to be a saint." Merton, "A saint? How do you expect me to be a saint? I can't be a saint." Fast forward just 10 years later, Merton would write in his in his work, Seeds of Contemplation, "To be a saint means to be myself. Therefore, the problem of holiness is in fact the problem of finding out who I am and discovering my true self." Merton came a long way in those 10 years from his time as a grad student at Columbia. He realized something which I believe goes to the heart of our faith, something which all of the great saints in our tradition and in my life have realized at some point in their journey back to God. Namely, that our paths to holiness, to sainthood, lie in discovering the people God created us to be and being those people. Period. It's good to hold up the saints as role models, but the truth is, we are not called to be the next John Francis Regis or Oscar Romero or Teresa of Calcutta or Ignatius Loyola. We are called in love to be ourselves and to be patient yet courageous in that. Even when your classmates or the church or our larger society or even you yourself are not yet ready to fully accept who God is calling you to be. I can still remember the dawning realization that I might be called to be a Jesuit and a priest. To say that I was initially resistant to that idea would be an understatement. Conversation for another day. But God was relentless. And I'm grateful that he was. Because if I had not taken the risk to follow that path, to be the person God was calling me to be, I would have missed out on so much. I love my life as a Jesuit and a priest. There's a joy that we experience when we live our lives in that sweet spot, doing what we're created to do. And I experience that every day of my life, including here at Regis, even in a short amount of time. I'm having a lot of fun. The BBC estimates that about 107 billion people have ever lived. 107 billion. And in that 107 billion, there is only one you. Ever. Only one of each of us. My friends, we are called to be those people God created us to be. Nothing more and nothing less. Part of that call, we know, we believe, is to be a people within a people. A community. We are built for connection. We're called to be a people of the Beatitudes, a people who work tirelessly for justice and peace. People who are merciful, people who are hungry for righteousness, especially for the least and the last in our world. We're called to go to the margins of the church in what Pope Francis calls a spirit of encounter, of friendship, where we find not strangers, but sisters and brothers. When we do that, we participate in bringing forth the reign of God. We take our place as saints among the saints in the long line of women and men of the Beatitudes who have preceded us. It's a tall order, and it's nothing less than a call to greatness. But this feast day reminds us, whether we realize it or not, it can be ours. This kind of greatness is within our grasp. All Saints' Day beckons us to something beautiful. It reminds us of our great potential, the promise that lies within each of us, the promise of holiness. It is the promise that was fulfilled in the countless people we venerate this day. Our models, our companions, our inspirations, our guides, all the saints. They give us hope because they assure us again and again to be a saint means to be myself. Every one of us, by the grace of God, can become one. Amen?